This is the Hunt Quietly podcast. I'm Matt Ranella.
Sorry, that took a bit.
Oh, no problem. We're recording, just so you know.
Perfect.
Yeah, thanks for working on this.
Yeah, man, this was interesting. Like,
Your dog just showed me its asshole.
he's going to talk to you too during this, I guarantee it. He's a lot less agreeable than Shifty. Where is she? Is she around?
Yeah, I will. She spent all day outside, so she's enjoying being in the warmth. It's a little bit brisk here today. So I want to try to couch the discussion a little bit in terms of how it relates to things you and I and the rest of our group care about. So do you mind if I start out by doing that?
Do it.
So one thing, a major thing that the Hunt Quietly group is concerned about is the future of publicly accessible, high quality, non-pay hunting. And a big piece of that, the picture there is access, right? And so that's why we're talking about farm subsidies, because I think there's a case to be made that large landowners, agricultural producers should be inclined to provide public access just because of all of the money that the taxpayer invests in their property and in their agricultural enterprises more generally, in the form of all kinds of subsidies that we're going to talk about. On average, the last several years, the American people have spent about $21 billion a year subsidizing agricultural enterprises, farms and ranches in the U.S. Did you know that, Evan?
Yeah, a lot.
So that number is so large that it's hard to wrap your mind around, at least mine. It's just too many zeros. There's 9 zeros in a billion.
Right. It's higher than the GDP of like most countries.
Oh, really?
Yeah, insane. It's a lot of money.
If we assume that it costs $75 an acre to lease hunting property, which for some of the parts of the country, that's not unrealistic. That's Iowa. That's on the high end for Iowa. And by putting it on the high end, that makes the statistic I'm about to recite conservative. So let's say that you can lease hunting land for $75 an acre. You could, with what the American taxpayer provides to farmers and ranchers every year, we could lease 270 million acres.
Wow.
Which is the equivalent of 7.5 states the size of Iowa.
That's nuts. That's what I was waiting for. That number has it's so big I have no context for it in terms of land mass. So that's huge.
Yeah. And so a little bit more on why we're just couching this discussion. I don't know if you'd agree to this, but I think it'd be best, so I'm asking if you'd be on board with this, that for the sake of discussion, let's just assume that we're okay with this amount of expense, with paying this
Right.
amount of money.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so we're not coming, is that okay with you? That's all right?
Yeah. No, for
We're,
the sake
we're,
of discussion.
we're not coming at this from the perspective of that we should be spending that, that there should be fewer agricultural subsidies.
Right.
What we're exploring is whether there should be access strings attached to it.
Right. And there's
And
two
I
things.
go ahead.
So two things I would add is like there it becomes especially egregious when people are effectively able to take in these subsidies for whatever reason, and then use those subsidies to help pay for their expenditure to lock people out of public land, publicly accessible land, right? So like if somebody buys, a ranch that's on the border of, 100,000 acres of BLM land, American taxpayers can effectively subsidize them to block access for those same taxpayers to go hunting, right?
Yeah.
And so that part of it, when you put that point on, in my mind, it makes it especially egregious. And then the other thing is, in terms of the reasons for these subsidies and all that, should I launch into kind of the so I did my undergraduate thesis in history on sort of one of the main reasons that the Farm Bill exists. And do you want me to go into that now, or should I wait?
I think that this is a logical time to go into that. Just in terms of wrapping up real quickly, like
Yeah.
how we couch the discussion, and maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's not even that. Maybe it's our plea isn't to the government to associate some kind of strings or have a policy that thou must allow access if thou wants us to pay for one's pivot or whatever. But just a change in perspective amongst large landowners, and appreciation for all the public money they take, and that, the sportsmen and society writ large, beyond just the sportsmen, appreciate access. So I'm
Yeah.
not sure how the information from a podcast like this should be used. Should be used to direct policy? Should it just be, something for large landowners to contemplate? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that makes sense to me. It's like a plea to at least consider this in a for landowners, as an ethical imperative almost, like they should at least have this in their calculus in accepting, especially some of the things we'll talk about. I mean, because the Farm Bill is massive, right? And so there's some things that just kind of are like almost automatic when you're producing food, but then there are other things that are really substantive extra investments. And when you're thinking about those type of things that are paid for by taxpayers, think about what you're doing with that land, and if you're allowing access, and especially think about if you're blocking access, right? Well, those people are listening to this podcast, right? But
That is where it's most clear that something should be done.
yeah, that's sort of like the maximalist argument, or even like we're creating. It's not a straw man because it's real, it exists, right? But it's a that's where it's most egregious for sure.
Yeah, and I have some eye-popping statistics about the value of landlocked land to producers that I'll share
Right.
with you a little later on.
Perfect.
So yeah,
All
the
right.
history of the Farm Bill.
Right. So the Farm Bill, I think the way that it's taught in um a lot of like schools and people who, as much that it is the origin of sort of what we call the Farm Bill now, is basically that FDR was doing a bunch of different things. It was the New Deal, and it was helping people in different ways, and so he decided to subsidize farmers in order to just because that's what he was doing. He was doing all sorts of things to help people, right? The New Deal is to have a wealth transfer from the highest levels of society into the common people, right? And it's just a part of that happy hunky dory, right?
Was the Dust Bowl period a factor in that as well?
It's one of the main factors. So the first farm bill, what we think of as the farm bill, looking at my notes here, it happened in 1933. There were some like proto sort of farm bills, and there certainly was like a legislative coalition that coalesced in the 20s. But the first thing that we sort of call the farm bill in looking back on it was 1933. So right around that Dust Bowl era. And so the idea was, there's this Great Depression going on. There's the Dust Bowl. Starvation honestly was a big deal. Like, people don't realize a lot of the time that before the New Deal, like there were a lot of issues with just kids getting enough calories and things like that in areas in California and the Southwest. And so the thing that gets missed a lot is that in actuality, there was almost a revolution that happened among farmers in that 1930s time period, and it was called the Farmers Holiday Association. And effectively, so you have these things in the 20s and the 30s where people are looking at this and they're saying, listen, if we just have a free market economy for agriculture, we're going to have all these producers, small yeoman producers, which is kind of the ideal of American civic virtue, right? They're going to go bust every 10 years. It just doesn't work. People are losing their shirts, and then other people are accumulating all this land, and it's causing issues with both just macroeconomic issues, but it's also causing issues with enough nutrition and food distribution, right? But they didn't have the political capital to make some big transformations happen in terms of actually creating the subsidized food system that we have now as part of the Farm Bill. And what actually happened was there was this guy, his name was Milo Reno, and he just totally lost to history, but he was big in the news back then. And he organized farmers in the upper Midwest, and it spread from there to effectively blockade cities to artificially increase the price that farmers would get for what they produce. And so they would go out and they would bring in trucks, and they would block, Milwaukee or Minneapolis or something like that. And if farmers were bringing their produce to market, they'd stop and talk to the people, and a lot of the farmers would participate, and they would dump milk or they would dump grain in order to number one, protest and cause a shortage in these cities to gain some political capital, but then number two, raise the price of food. And so it's a really economically primitive sort of movement, but it's having a really big effect. And they did some really revolutionary stuff. Like when there were farm auctions, they would go and they would beat up the people who were trying to take the farms from people who'd lost their shirts in the Dust Bowl, and then they'd buy it back for $1, and then they'd give it back to the person whose it was, right? And there was a few times where local sheriffs would try and arrest these guys, and they went and surrounded the jail and broke people out. So it's a really
wow, yeah. I had no idea about any of that.
They don't teach it, it's kind of, maybe they don't teach it for a reason, but the idea behind it was, we are doing our best to produce things. When we do that, then the price goes down. Nobody can make any money on this. People are losing their farms all the time, right? So it's kind of a primitive response to this economic reality. And they started demanding some of the first subsidies from the government to do that, right? And their arguments were basically just around economic justice and things like that. But that really forced the hand of legislators and FDR to go further than they were planning to do with the initial farm bill. And the idea behind it was to subsidize farmers to not grow crops, to provide farm insurance that happened a little bit later in the 40s, so that there was a little bit more safety and longevity in farming, and then things just kept getting added to it. Conservation wasn't added to the Farm Bill in specific terms until 1985. So the idea of like CRP land, right? CRP land is both a
conservation reserve program land,
yes,
folks. Yeah.
yeah. That's
Which
both
is should we just say what that is real quick?
yeah, please.
So yeah, it's a program that pays farmers to take highly erodible land out of production. So the idea is that the value to society is that those lands are available for the future if we're in a crunch and we need more farmland. So, there's kind of like bankrolling, like, because once lands go into CRP, they're planted with perennial plants, which help hold the soil. So,
yeah, and it provides a lot of habitat, right?
Right.
Which is great. Like people are always talking about hunting pheasants in CRP, right? But it also reduces the amount of arable land available for in a given year. And it's a voluntary program, so it's a price control mechanism as well, right?
Yeah.
And so those are
It should work to increase the price of commodities.
Exactly. Right. And so those were sort of the first forays into adding conservation into the Farm Bill. Nowadays, there's a bunch of other things, and we could talk about how the Inflation Reduction Act has like changed this, and there's a lot of other things too. But effectively, it built over time to the point where the Farm Bill is this massive, multifaceted expenditure that is all kind of together in these same programs, and there's offices all over the place and all that. But the reason for it initially was there was a problem, and we effectively, took agricultural food production at a large scale out of the free market economy and put it into a subsidized, more less free market economy in order to assure that Americans have enough to eat at reasonable prices and that farmers aren't continually yo-yoing between, profit and losing their shirts all the time, right? And that still happens. But
it makes a lot of sense through a certain lens. It makes a lot of sense to stabilize the goal is to stabilize the food system. So in lean years, farmers aren't going broke, and in fat years, we're not producing more than we need, and
yeah.
So as it stands right now, the breakdown in terms of how the money is spent is about 11 billion in crop insurance subsidies, 2 billion in commodity programs. So that's okay. So we have crop insurance at 11 billion. The commodity programs, those are subsidies, like you're paying farmers to produce corn or whatever. There's a handful of corn, soybeans, cotton. There's a couple other ones that farmers get paid to grow.
Or not grow. Yeah.
Or not grow, right. Disaster programs, that's about 5 billion. So that's, if you don't have the highly subsidized crop insurance and you experience extreme drought and you're a rancher, you can get some money for hay, or if you have a flood in your cornfield, you can get compensated for that. So that's just like a direct payout. And then, I think there's a misconception amongst hunters that the conservation piece is bigger than it is, but it's only about $2 billion a year,
right?
Which is about 1/10 of the total Farm Bill expenditure in any given year. So I don't know where you want to go next. There's a lot of stuff I have here. Maybe we should talk a little bit about about the crop insurance.
Yeah.
So I talked to a friend of mine that works extensively in with drought insurance, and I don't want to. It was an off the record discussion. I don't want to get him in trouble with his employer or anything like that. But he was telling me that over the last several years, the payout, the return on investment in drought insurance is about $1.50 to $3 a dollar. So
Right.
for every dollar somebody spends on a premium, they get $1.50 to $3 in return. And could you imagine an insurance company working that way?
Yeah, it'd be broke real quick.
So
Well,
that just
I know two guys. So my house is by the river here in where I live, and I know two guys who still farm the river bottoms down there, and every once in a while they'll get a crop out of there, right? So it's a perennial sort of thing where they're having some sort of subsidized crop insurance, and effectively they're planting corn knowing that it's going to flood, right?
okay.
And so that is it's the way that they think about it, and I really believe this when I talk to them, is like, hey, we've farmed this for a long time, and like this is our land, and we want to be getting corn out of here. And the insurance is like, they're not trying to game the system necessarily, but in function they are, right? Like it's a difficult thing. So
They
I
wouldn't do it if the highly subsidized farm insurance
they couldn't
wasn't
do it.
available. Yeah, they couldn't do it. They'd go broke.
Right, right.
I spend some time going back to how you couch a conversation like this thing, thinking about, let's say that we got all this money back in conservation and lower food prices. Then maybe there shouldn't be access strings attached to it. But I just don't see that that's the case. I mean,
Right.
like I had EKIP is one of the big the EKIP program makes up, it's a NRC, a Natural Resource Conservation Service program. And I can't even remember what EKIP stands for. Do you remember?
No, I don't remember.
It's EQIP, but that makes up the bulk of the conservation portion of the farm bill. And I've gotten money from that. I have a 10-acre pasture. Well, it's 7 acres now because I gave 3 of them 3 acres to my friend and he built a house on it. And when I moved into this house, I was irrigating out of a ditch. There's an irrigation ditch. And the neighbors, several of the neighbors and myself, we put in a proposal to get gated pipe and have the water piped to our land, which from a quality of life perspective was huge.
Right.
It was a huge reduction in labor for me to irrigate my pasture, And then I think about a farmer getting a pivot or some of the other things we can talk about that are in the EKIP program. I got a list here we can get to.
Real quick, environmental quality incentives program.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. That's where, to me, the implications for access come into play. When the farmer or the rancher is getting more in terms of quality of life and maybe an income than the consumer is.
Right. Agreed. That's key. So there's like writ large, there are all sorts of good reasons for us to have a farm bill because, you know, for just from a macroeconomic or society perspective, like we want to be able to have predictable food prices, and we don't want farmers going bankrupt all the time, right?
Right.
Like those things are true. But some of these other things, which are good things for conservation, for wildlife, you know, different things like that, we're not saying they're not good things necessarily. Those are extras, right? They're things that are, like you said, quality of life, or they're major, you know, subsidization of improvements that on land that then the farmer owns, and then greatly increases the value of that property as an asset, right? And so those things, like around the edges, I think that's really where um, it seems really fair from like an ethical perspective to have some sort of access initiative. And at the very minimum, let's just like paint a picture about this, right? If you get like this, some of these extras, like where they're paying you to put in a pivot, and you know, some of the research I did, even with those improvements, sometimes people can make a profit on that, right? So they're making a cash profit if they're doing it themselves. And it's not all the time, but you know, they're making a cash profit, and they're also improving their land, which is a quality of life improvement. And then they're also, their asset of their land is growing in value, right? So it's a triple whammy. They're getting all these benefits. That kind of thing, it's like at the very least, you should put a clause in to say you can't block people out of adjacent public land, right? Like that seems to be, I know like private property rights are sacrosanct in the United States, and we don't mean to second guess that. But these are public subsidies that are paid for by me going to work every day, by you going to work every day, that directly benefit somebody's net worth in addition to what they're doing with their land producing food, right? And so to me, that's the clearest example of something where it's not an outrageous communist sort of ask to do this. It's saying, listen, you're benefiting all these ways. You're in this scenario, you're blocking people from public land that they own. You can't do that if you're benefiting from this program, right? Like to me, that's a very justifiable, easy like thing to knock out here. That seems to be very, very clear to me.
The Revolutionary War was about, I mean, this is what you're told in junior or in elementary school, or was about taxation without representation, right?
Right. Right.
So in this case, could there be a case for taxation with like no access, or like you don't get to derive any benefit from the taxation?
Yeah, you're going to lead a new American Revolution. I think it makes sense here, man. It's I think that there's varying degrees of this, you know, like but and we are getting benefit from it, right? So we are getting,
absolutely,
we're getting lower food prices. We're getting our friends and family are not, you know, destitute because they're just making food, they're producing food for us. I mean, there's all sorts of things that we benefit from. Even as hunters, we benefit, right? Like we benefit. I don't know how efficiently we benefit, but when land is improved, especially with water planning, we benefit a lot from that, right? Like we were when I was antelope hunting out by you, like there wouldn't be a lot of antelope in a lot of those places without some sort of water planning, right? Like, and those things are subsidized by taxpayer money. So as hunters, we benefit, right? But that's not a. It still doesn't remove the ethical imperative. I think in some instances that are really somewhat, you know, egregious. And overall, to have some sort of conversation about public access, right? I mean, it's just it's we're not talking. It's such a multifaceted thing that like there there are some components of this at the very least where you can make a pretty strong argument. I think that public access provisions should be attached.
Yeah, the way I think of it is, the $2 billion or $20 billion a year in the farm bill. If you could somehow figure out what's the dollar amount, if you could value the well-being that provides to the recipients,
Right.
in terms of reduced workload, economic stability, um, increased revenue, that dollar amount is the dollar that those people, the dollar's worth of access they should provide. I think
Right.
the world would be a fairer place, if they were, if they somehow, these large landowners, provided that many dollars worth of access.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I think the only thing that I would say is that like we get other benefit, like just playing my dad's a philosopher, so just thinking about this from like a fairness perspective, we get other benefits too.
Oh
So
yeah,
like,
those are the ones that's the other part of the money.
right,
You know what I'm
right,
saying?
okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So like it should be the amount that we get just in like the fair food prices and the not starving to death and all that.
Yeah, they
Like
shouldn't have to provide access for any of that value.
that's
Yeah.
baked in. We're happy to pay for that. And then it's
Yeah.
the next, yeah. But even that is really substantive. The chunk of the change that you're talking about is very substantive.
So we've talked a little bit about the landlocked public land, and I crunched a few numbers on that. So I mean, and that maybe that's the, like you were saying, you kind of alluded to, it's like maybe that's the low hanging fruit in terms of making our case, is
Yeah.
that with all the public money that goes into agricultural enterprises, they should at least be incentivized to provide access to landlocked land. So
Yeah.
if there's landlocked state, federal land, like land that's surrounded by farmland, they should at least be incentivized to give us access to
Yes.
that. Another piece of that is how those are, most of that landlocked land is grazing land, right?
Right.
So do you know what the federal grazing lease, what it costs?
No, but I know it's low.
Yeah. So if you wanted to, you wouldn't be in a position to lease grazing rights on public land because you're not a landowner. But if you were in a position to do that, to do so, you'd pay $1.35 an AUM, an animal unit month, which is defined as the amount of forage required to sustain a cow and its calf for a month.
So wait, I have a question about that, Matt. If if there, like, let's say that there's an improvement on that land that increases the amount of forage, then the price goes up.
I don't know that if it ever gets reevaluated. And these are typically undeveloped lands.
Okay.
They're not irrigated or anything like that.
Right.
So the amount of grass they produce is pretty stable.
Okay.
There can be all kinds of improvements that the American people pay for on these lands. Spring development, wells, roads, et cetera, but we don't do things to make them more productive. They're just
Okay.
They're typically natural grasslands.
Okay.
So, do you have a sense for what the going rate is on the commercial market? There was a congressional investigation into that in 2019, and what they discovered was that the lease rate on private land for grazing rights, comparable lands to what you'd find on Forest Service or BLM, is $23.40
Per the same unit.
per animal unit month. So that's like a little over $20. We give what's a good way to say this? That we give $23 worth of grass to ranchers for the cost of $1.35.
Right.
According to Congress. This isn't us. This is according to Congress.
Right.
So in order to put that in perspective, I looked up how many acres of landlocked public land there are in the U.S., and there's 16 million. So just on that 16 million of landlocked, just the 16, there's 245 million acres of BLM in the U.S. But just on the 16 million acres of landlocked BLM, state and federal, if we assume $5 an acre for a hunting lease, which is now we're not in Iowa anymore, right? We're in the Western U.S. So $5 is more typical according to what I got on a lease finder site. And that's where I came up with that figure because I looked at some hunting leases. I did the same with the Iowa, the $75 figure. So let's assume that leasing hunting land in the Western U.S. is $5 an acre.
Yeah.
With the value of free grass that we give to ranchers, we could, on landlocked federal, we could lease between 16 and 32 million acres.
Wow.
So if the government charged fair market value for the grass that's on BLM and state and federal, and took that money, the proceeds, and put it into an access program, they could open up 16 to 32 million acres of land. That would like increase block management.
What's block management at?
6.9. So it would increase it between 2 and 5 times. At the high end, that 32 million, that would open up half of the private land in the state of Montana.
That is crazy.
Just by charging fair market value for grass on landlocked BLM.
Right.
State and federal.
And so that is so key, because if you could have a program here where you say, just for the landlocked land, not for publicly, like I hunted a bunch of land that was accessible that had cows on it, right? But just for the landlocked land, you could say, well, it's $26 or $25 animal unit, whatever you said there, or it's the rate for everything else if you provide access, right? So it's not even a subsidy necessarily. It's just a potential incentive, and you're saying that. And then that would potentially open up, a great amount of land. It would, double the amount or more of land that's currently enrolled in block management.
Yeah, I mean, a clean way of saying it, and I don't know why it's just hitting me now. I spent all day today coding computers, and then I spent a little bit of time at the end of the day getting ready for this and crunching some numbers for this. Another way to say it is like the dollar value of the grass on landlocked public land is enough to lease all that land for hunting on the private market.
Right.
At least maybe you could lease twice as much. When I keep going back and forth between it's worth what it would cost to lease between 16 and 32 million dollars, it depends on whether we assume an animal unit month is 2 acres or 4 acres. Does it take two acres to sustain a cow and a calf for a month, or 4? I found varying figures on that. It varies a bunch just depending on the rangeland. There's some rangelands in New Mexico where it would take probably 10 acres to
Right.
sustain a cow and a calf for a month. And there's some acres in Montana, some places in Montana where it would probably take a quarter acre to sustain a cow and a calf for a month.
Right. And there, even like there's areas where there's like outcroppings and things like that that will reduce that. So even within a 1 square mile area, those acres can be very, very different in terms of productivity. If there's a butte on that doesn't, have a flat top, then that's going to be pretty difficult to raise cows on, right? So,
Right. And I don't want to beat this to death too much, but I just want to just one more little tick here, like one more little stat. Like, let's say it's not just landlocked, but the government charged fair market value for all BLM,
right.
and took the proceeds from that and put it towards access programs. That would be enough to open up 240 to 480 million acres of
And
land.
if that happened, we wouldn't have a problem. Like you and I could not worry about this anymore. 480
That's
million acres.
2 to 4 Montanas.
Yeah, there wouldn't be crowding anymore, right? If that could happen, like that's a huge difference. That's crazy.
The difference between other people that work on corner hopping issues and stuff like that and us is that we don't make any money, so we can just say it. You'll never hear Onyx or anybody else, BHA or any other group discuss this component.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think we can talk about it from like a purely just logical lens here, but like that I'm not saying hunters should be the end all be all of like the farm bill and public subsidies. Like we acknowledge that, listeners. But the like that aspect of it, just by charging the market rate for private land and public land, that would solve our crowding problem in the United States, likely, right? Like or at least in the West, there's different areas.
But it would solve crowding probably. There's still just the same amount of animals, so there's
True.
There would continue to be way too much demand for the supply.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. There'd be too much demand for the supply, but when you were able to draw a tag, once you got past that problem,
then you wouldn't be crowded, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I just err on the side of access. Like if access was better, I believe hunting would bring more people more to satisfaction.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think also like those that is taken into account in at least most states' tag allocations is the ability, like it's the harvest numbers, right? So presumably if you open up all those acres, you would have a higher success rate, and you could, there's different things like that. So that would, I don't know what that would do to tag draws, but it wouldn't be a neutral effect, right? Like you could potentially see that helping or harming tag draws, I guess, but potentially helping.
Yeah, it would.
But it's not the solution to all of our problems, but like that in itself would be a much more, it would be a more fair exchange between large landowners and people who are paying for those large landowners' profitability, et cetera, in terms of publicly accessible non-pay hunting, right? Like that, it evens the scales a little bit between the people who are paying for this and the people who are
in terms of it would have the effect of evening the playing field between the Cam Hayneses and Joe Rogans and the Evan Curtins and Matt Ranellas.
That's right.
And I don't know, but there's just a lot of people that just think that pay hunting is illegitimate. I'm one of them. Aldo Leopold was one of them. I don't know if you ever saw his 1919 quote in the Journal of Forestry about there's a certain breed of sportsman that is
Yes.
used, bought in sport. You know, it's 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 much longer than that and very eloquent. But I just don't have any interest in paying to hunt.
No.
I would rather go buy. I'd rather raise sheep on my 7 acres
Yeah. Right.
than pay to
Right.
hunt.
It goes so far as this is a digression, but like when I'm talking to somebody, like when you're in a public event and somebody else is into hunting and you start talking, if they if it even if it's not a high fence operation, but they're talking about, like we got this lease and or whatever, they're paying for it, I immediately lose interest. Like it's like, okay, we're not talking about
In
the same
another
thing here,
realm,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not the same at all.
I was just podcasting with this dude a couple nights ago, and I was telling him that when I was a kid, we went to this outdoor expo on the weekend, one weekend a year. It was at the hockey arena at the LC Walker Hockey Arena in Muskegon, Michigan. And in there, there'd be people selling knives and bows and boats and whatever. And they had a stock tank in there with trout.
Yes.
You've seen this?
They
And you can
still do
fish.
that
Oh, they still do it?
in the Minnesota outdoor expo, something like that. They still do that every year. They have the
Okay.
big stock picks, and yeah, so I've seen exactly this.
Even because we grew up on a lake, even as a 5, 6 year old kid, I remember looking at that and being like, what? And having zero interest
It's
in doing
sad.
that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know. It's one of those things where sometimes like you and I spend a lot of time thinking about the problems that are causing some of this, and like it seems like it kind of like I spend a lot of time grappling with different things and thinking through these issues and being annoyed by hunting media and different things that are shoved in my face. But sometimes I think we're the lucky ones. Like we're out there enjoying this the way that God meant it to be or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like we don't have to. We're really experiencing the full range of it, and
that's a really good point, and not something I spend nearly enough time thinking about.
we should think about how lucky we are. Man.
Oh, yeah.
Really.
I pity people that have to hunt with a camera behind them.
Yeah, right. Or people who don't like people who just like pay for shortcuts, and they don't spend the time and they don't suffer for it. You know what I mean?
They don't
Like,
earn it. Yeah.
yes, that's not satisfying, and they're not getting the full experience. And yeah, there's a bunch of things we could say about that. But and maybe that's not a universally shared perspective, but like I wanna work for it. Like I don't want to like it feels that's part of the process, right?
Oh, yeah. When you were out here busting your balls day after day looking for that antelope, and then
God,
I got to be there when you got it. I mean, it's like
fuck
if
yeah.
that was a 2 hour drive out on the ranch with the guide and he pointed it out to you and you shot
Yeah.
it, and then he went and cleaned it and
I have no interest in
packed it in your truck for you, like you can't even begin to compare
Agreed.
how much satisfaction like that brought you compared to what that would bring somebody like a sport that's that hired an outfitter.
It's a different activity. It's as different as fishing in the stock tank, right? It's
Right.
in my
Yep.
opinion.
Yep.
And that I feel like is I feel like that is something that is valued, and it makes me feel lucky to like have those values because I'm not like I'm not drawn in by that substitution of the grind or of the whatever, so like that I don't know, that's something to be worthwhile, but the key here is to getting back to what we were talking about is if we could if there were some strings attached for access, more people would be able to have that experience more often.
Right. More people
And
would
that-
have the more, I don't know what you say, how you say it, just like traditional hunting
Authentic.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. The only other thing I had on the ag subsidies front is I looked at how EKIP dollars are spent, the Environmental Quality Incentive Program money, how that's spent. And I wanted to spend a little time talking about that.
Yeah.
So this is the conservation portion, the portion that sportsmen tend to be supportive of. So this is CRP is part of the, well, that's not part of EKIP, but it's part of the conservation bit. So I don't know how that works, but things like improving water and air quality, conserving ground and surface water, increasing soil health, reducing soil erosion and sedimentation, improving or creating wildlife habitat. So maybe CRP is part of EKIP, mitigating against drought and increasing weather, mitigating against drought and weather volatility. So those are the goals of the EKIP program. And if one were to apply for EKIP money and get a project funded, the EKIP would be paying between 50 and 75% of what the project costs. So like when I got this gated pipe put in, the NRCS, the taxpayer paid, I think in that case, 70% of what it cost.
Right.
And so I guess the question becomes, is there always conservation value? How in this, like we're talking about, again, $2 billion a year, roughly.
Right.
It's been between 1.8 billion and 2.2 billion for the EKIP program the last several years. And the selling point to the American people is conservation. How much conservation value is in that? And I'd say a lot, I don't know, some amount of this, there's not really. Like,
right.
The way we were able to justify this gated pipe thing was less soil, like a less water, wasting of water, like deep percolation into the ground water. Like the groundwater level here is about 10 feet down.
Wow.
And there's a lot of under subsurface flow into the Yellowstone. So the way this pipe works is that there's an irrigation diversion dam on the Tongue River, which is a tributary of the Yellowstone. That water gets diverted into a ditch and flows through to our properties. And this is before the gated pipe. Now that all this happens, but in pipes, and we put tarps in the ditch and have it flood out into our fields. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
Because if you don't get it, the listening audience isn't going to get it.
No,
and then it flows back. What we don't use flows back to the Yellowstone.
Right.
So the conservation value was supposed to be that it prevented some of that ditch water from deep percolating into the ground.
To be below the
like that, it would escape the ditch, like it would drain out of the ditch into the groundwater.
Got it.
But it's just like I say, the water table's only 10 feet down.
Right. You could put a jet pump from Menards in there and you could have.
Well, that water, that subsurface water is flowing into the Yellowstone as well, a lot of it.
Right.
It just is a tough sell.
But here's the thing on that, like it depends on how we define conservation, right? If it's agricultural conservation, that's one thing. Whereas if it's natural resource conservation, that's another, right? So like if you have,
I'm thinking of it in terms of natural resources. But I never thought about that. Yeah.
It depends on how they define it.
Right. So, but there's a lot of things that clearly, there's probably some conservation benefit, but there's some of it that's kind of sketch to me. Like, they'll pay for you to, there's the they're paying for a lot of greenhouses.
Right. Right.
So
That's not,
you can put in, you can apply to have the federal government pay for 3/4 of your greenhouse, and you don't even have to be a large landowner to have that happen.
no. And
You can just have a
that,
couple acres.
and there's a world in which that could be conservation, right? Like if you have a greenhouse and therefore you could produce more, like you have a biointensive method in that greenhouse, and then you let other land that you used to farm then become, CRP land or something like that that's more productive for wildlife.
Right.
But
Yeah.
that's not a requirement, right? So it's like it's a potential. The other thing I'd say here, so I talked to some other folks again off the record, same as you, and so that 70% or 50 to 70%, there are some potential issues with that. And there are instances where people can make profits off of those incentives. So they're paying for something to happen. The idea is that they're subsidizing a project that is good for the public good, right? Like that's the initial idea. They
Yeah.
put in a pivot, they put in a greenhouse, and that greenhouse affects that greenhouse allows people to be more productive on less acres. Like those things are good for the food supply, right? But those rates for how it determines if it's 50% or 70%, those are based statewide. And so some of the people that I talked to for this were saying like, well, if that's averaged out, people in Miles City by you are going to get a better deal percentage wise than people over by Missoula or by Bozeman, right?
Oh, because the cost of stuff is lower here?
Correct. The cost of
Okay.
labor is lower. The cost of materials is potentially lower, and those two things basically. So if the statewide average is for an ag pivot is $10, right? And they're going to say, well, we'll pay $5 to $7. Well, if you're in
It's
Miles
more
City,
like $40,000 to $100,000, just
right?
so people know.
Totally. Yeah, this is a stupid example, but if you're in Miles City where you're on the lower end of that, hypothetically, you could actually make a profit. And one of the questions I asked was like, if I have the equipment, like if it's a noxious weed removal sort of thing that EKIP or NRCS funding is paying for, right? And I've got the equipment to do it, and this is a 70-year-old tractor, and I've already amateurized that and all that. Does that matter? And everybody that I talked to said no, it does not matter at all. It's a blanket amount for the whole thing. So as long as you meet the conditions in the contract for these things, there's a million ways that you could potentially make some money off of this.
So you might get a new irrigation pivot and have more money in your pocket because your brother-in-law puts them in for a living and he's willing to do it for free or what on a weekend if you help him or whatever.
Right. You get literally cash in your pocket at the end of it. You have to front the upfront cost, but then you get reimbursed. You get extra cash in your pocket, right?
Yeah.
And so that I don't think that there's a lot of people who are like, most people who are doing this are probably engaging with this in the right way. But both people that I talked to for this said that they have frequent flyers. They have people who know how to game the system. They have people who they're sure making profits off of whatever they can on this, and they're basically like welfare queens here, like just gaming the system to be able to rake in taxpayer dollars, which is their right according to the law. Like they're not doing anything illegal.
Yeah. There where I live, this is a big ranching community, farming and ranching community. There are farmers and ranchers here that have a reputation for getting as much money from the government as they possibly can.
Right.
And then there's other people that kind of shun it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just thought I'd rattle off a few of the things that sorts of projects that EKIP dollars pay for, and you folks can all decide for yourselves whether you think it puts more pheasants in the borrow pits and deer in the in between the fields and the hedgerows and stuff. Chemical sheds, so that'd be like a shed to store chemicals. These are just listed on the NRCS website as typical sorts of things that money would be used for. Conservation crop rotations. So that would be following up your corn with soybeans or whatever, which is what people mostly do anyway. Anyway, maybe there's something more to it than that, but crop rotation is just generally like you don't plant the same crop 2 years in a row because it allows for a buildup of pathogens. So if you keep growing corn, the corn pathogens are going to build up over time and stunt your corn.
Right. Nitrogen fixing back and forth. But maybe they're talking about cover crops or something like that.
Well, no, that's another one is cover crops.
Really?
So, yeah. So in a lot of parts of the country, in the West, in the arid West, you can't crop. You can't grow crops on the same piece of ground every year because there's not enough water. You have to store some water in the soil. So a lot of times they'll plant cover crops they'll grow wheat, then the next year they grow a cover crop that doesn't use as much water, and maybe it's a legume, so it increases soil nitrogen, and then the next year they grow wheat again or something like that.
And where I'm from, cover crops are erosion management.
Okay, entirely. Right. Yeah. Yep. Dust control in feedlots and on roads. Pasture renovations, so that's like reseeding a pasture.
Okay.
I mean that's just you have a pasture that you wanted it to be 50% alfalfa and 50% grass, and over time the grass outcompetes the alfalfa, so you reseed it so you can get some more alfalfa in it, and you can decide for yourself whether that has conservation benefit. Hedgerow planting, integrated pest management, integrated pest management is when you use more than one thing, like you use a biological control agent and an herbicide, or sheep grazing and a biocontrol agent or whatever.
And hypothetically, you could reduce herbicide use.
Sure. Yep. Irrigation water management. So I guess that would be like my project or a pivot. Range planting. So that's not done very much, but that would be if you go into native rangeland and try to augment what's growing there by seeding stuff. Going from conventional till to no-till should help with soil erosion. They might, but I guess what they're probably buying you there is a no-till drill.
Yeah,
that'd be one thing.
Yeah.
Shelter belts, greenhouses, field drainage. So if you have a drainage problem, like you have a field has wet spots in it that don't drain, and then you can't get anything to grow there, they'll put in drain tile,
which might have negative conservation value.
Yeah, if you're a duck hunter, you should maybe not like that. And the list goes on. Fences for rotational grazing, prescribed grazing, etc. There's also something I meant to look into but didn't. But they also offer agricultural conservation easement. There's a agricultural conservation easement program. Do you know anything about that?
So no, I just know like conservation easements, are longer term or permanent easements on your property to take things out of agricultural production or development in order to longer term preserve natural resources. But I don't know.
I don't know how theirs works, but other entities provide those as well. Like in Montana, we have the Montana Habitat Program. They'll pay up. I think they pay about 40%. They give the landowner 40% of the value of the land.
Right.
And in exchange, they have to institute some conservation measures and allow some amount of public access.
Yeah. In Minnesota, we have something similar, but there's no public access requirement, but it's a permanent easement. So you can never develop
Same here.
Yeah. So CRP is kind of a version of that temporarily, right? I mean,
Right.
because CRP requirements are no noxious weeds. So it's a maybe that's what it's referring to by a different name, but it's functionally similar at least.
Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah. So what I talked about or looked up here with folks was that and there's so much. Farm Bill is so big. We're probably going to have the we could have 10 of these to talk about this. But there are ways in which the Farm Bill morphs over time to basically like add pork in terms of from a legislative perspective, also probably from an agricultural perspective, but from a legislative perspective, that are advocated for on local levels. So both Democrats and Republicans, support the Farm Bill in different ways, and there are specific things.
There's things in there that you might not initially think, like this is like the SNAP program and food stamps and things like that, right?
Right. So that's the great bargain is that you have both expenditure on that and expenditure on for large landowners for food production.
The Democrats tend to like the food stamp component, and the Republicans tend to like the farm subsidies component.
I think both of them like the farm subsidies component because like those are their constituents, those are their like donors, and so a lot of the times like that part of it is what drifts, right? People who are on food stamps don't have a that's an ideological thing. It's not a constituent thing. It's not a nobody's giving them money, donating their campaigns for that issue, generally speaking. But the way that this can sort of like morph and move is that there could be sort of pet projects that are put into here. So the other thing that I mentioned is the Inflation Reduction Act was a major input of cash and incentives and other things that went into the Farm Bill. We currently don't have an active Farm Bill, so it's sort of like coasting, and there are provisions that have sunset and they need to update it, right? And so
they've been trying to pass a new Farm Bill since 2022.
Yeah, that's when the last time they passed a Farm Bill was something like 2011, complete in its completion, and that's when some of the provisions started running out. And so there used to be things like there were caps on the amount of subsidies that somebody could take in NRCS funded project in a year, and NRCS hasn't sunset, but those caps have sunset. So there are people who are applying again and again and again multiple times a year for.
So there's no cap anymore.
There's a cap per project, but not total. There used
not
to be
per person.
Cap. Correct. Not per property, per land.
Yeah. Okay.
However it was. So those things that have expired, there are interests that have sort of been like, well, we don't want to renew that because it's helping, X, Y, and Z, and they donate to my campaign. And so those are ways where there's all sorts of things we couldn't even have time to get into that are snarled up in that.
But one thing you're just saying to clarify is that a lot of this Inflation Reduction Act money is being spent as if it was like Farm Bill money.
It is. It actually adds to the Farm Bill. Yeah. Okay. So there are pathways in which the IRA money are like designated for Farm Bill programs that grow the Farm Bill programs. But then that they gave a lot of money to the system without renewing those restrictions on the system, is my understanding.
Okay.
And so that is causing a lot of potential issues. But just generally speaking, the initial intention of this is good, right? We don't have bankrupt farmers. We don't have starving kids, right? Nobody has a problem with that. But over time, these special interest sort of components keep coming in and making different components of this like more and more out into left field and profitable for certain people, and there's these little components of which that allow certain people who are really savvy in these things to make a lot of money, and so the original tension gets muddied. And that's kind of another component of this, where when you're dealing with like a big government thing like this, there's things that can sneak in, first of all, and then there's trades that are made, right? You need this one senator to vote for this, and he or she wants something that is really not in line with the original intention of the Farm Bill. Well, you're going to give them that because you want the Farm Bill to pass, right? And
Right.
so those things build up over time. And so I just wanted to like put that in there because both people said this. It's like the original intention of the Farm Bill was very good. There are provisions of the Farm Bill. The core of the Farm Bill is really necessary, really good. Like really allows us to have the agricultural system that we have in the good ways that we have it. And all the things around the outside they're mostly not even just like mistakes or like people not, like reading things in the bill or whatever. Mostly it is this horse trading that happens with particular constituents of particular legislators that then add on things that make it seem, not in line with the original intention of the bill. And so that was
some of the same machinations that are now leading us to be flirting with a government shutdown as we
Yes.
speak. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Do you get time off if there's a government shutdown?
yeah, I do. I'm not supposed to really talk about what I do on the podcast for a living.
Right.
I mean, I'm not going to worry about that, but yeah, I'm a federal employee. I will get some time off, some much not wanted time off. I'm loving what I'm doing right now, so I'm really hoping to get it squared away.
We should all be so lucky. That's great.
Oh man, I'm excited to go to work every day because, like I told you, I'm writing a bunch of code, but it's towards an end that I'm really interested in. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, I guess it'd be a major omission not to mention that there is a small access program in the Farm Bill.
To be fair.
Yeah, the Voluntary Public Access Habitat Improvement Program, VPA HIP, and that gets so complicated. I didn't realize that we hadn't had a Farm Bill since 2011, but there was been a yearly allocation to VPA HIP for some time.
Correct,
and it just got increased quite a bit. I don't remember how much. But it must be that even though they're not passing the Farm Bill, they can still change the amount of money that's allocated to different components.
They're not passing an entire Farm Bill, but they are reauthorizing and passing parts of it, right?
Okay.
So that's the thing, yeah.
Sorry, folks. Evan just cut out for a minute there, but we're back, and what you were telling me was that they can kind of renew components of the Farm Bill without passing the whole thing. At which point it's just kind of like a formality to pass the Farm Bill, isn't it?
Well, it depends because they're not renewing the entire sweep, like the entire intention, right? So that they're renewing little parts of it, and then that leads to things like the overall caps per year being gone, because they're not doing it in like a systemic manner, right?
Yeah. I imagine if it was like the federal budget, where if you don't have money, if there's not a continuing resolution or a new budget, the government shuts down, then by now they would have passed a Farm Bill, right?
Right. Well, there's parts of it that are like that.
Really?
They get continuing resolutions for. So my understanding.
No, I'm saying if they couldn't, like, okay, yeah. So they get continuing resolutions for this stuff, and that's what makes it so that they aren't pressured to pass it. All right, we had another little glitch there, but I think anyway we're kind of wrapping up now. I think. Do you have more?
No, I think there's a bunch more to dig in here, but just from a total there's all sorts of interesting things that we could talk about with this that play into the things that we're concerned about, right? And I'm sure we can talk about more of them in the future if there's little things that come up. But overall, the big perspective I think remains the same. Like there is a very valid argument in at least some cases, in at least some funding sources, that public access should be a part of the conditions for accepting this money. And I think there's also a um, potential benefit of if this is something you care about, to advocate with your legislators about increasing those dollars that they have for available for public access, which was successful, as Matt said. So
Yeah, I mean,
continue.
in terms of trying to get your legislator to work on access, it's something to mention, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other thing I'd say is, like, and this plays into the farm bill a little bit, but there's all that stuff going on in with Utah and some other states that are joining a um, lawsuit to try and revert BLM land back to state man. And
Sorry, folks. Again, another glitch, and that Evan said it's making us look like amateurs, but we are amateurs because we're not getting paid.
that's
So
right. There's a blizzard here. I'm sorry.
you get the straight dope, but you get lower production quality with the Hunt Quietly podcast.
That's worth it.
So where were we? Oh, you brought up there's this initiative to sell off federal lands is rearing its ugly head again.
Yeah, yeah, and that I think is it's not necessarily part of the farm bill, but we're talking about like the subsidies that you were talking about earlier in terms of BLM land, right, for grazing rights,
Mm-hmm.
um, or the lower rates. Like that's tied in there to part of this. And so if you can engage, if that BLM land is sold off, those farmers are going to have to pay a lot more money to lease that land, right? And so there's some potential.
Unless the state just keeps the lease fee the same. I don't know.
They can't afford it. That's the problem. So they, they're saying that they're saying that they will not sell off the public land, and they'll keep managing it the same way. And the problem is every budget analysis says that they have many times less money than is necessary to do so. And so the reality is, like, that land will get sold off eventually, right? And that could, I just think that the only pitch I have is that there could be natural allies for us as hunters in preventing those things in agricultural producers, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can make those reach out. We can make those arguments, so that it can we can find a lot of people that come together to overcome this, because it's
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and I've thought about that some too. I've been thinking the last few months, if I was a rancher and I had a BLM grazing lease, I'm not sure that I'd be real excited about the federal transfer to the state.
yeah. Well, because if they sell it, they could sell it to anyone, right? And
Right.
and and if there's a bidding war, like let's say you've got 80 acres in the middle of your 160 or whatever, right? Someone else could buy that, and then you would be legally mandated to give them access to it, right? And when you're talking about a sweet deal like that $1.50 or whatever it is per animal unit, well, who knows if purchasing that land for a market rate is actually worth it for you or not, right? So um, I don't know. That just seems like there could be some natural allies there, and we need all the allies we can get, because I really don't think that that's getting enough attention, and I think that people are because it's failed so often. People are underestimating the chance that could go through,
Mm-hmm.
and so we need to get all the allies we can, because the people that hurts the most is people who are interested in publicly accessible non-pay hunting. It's
Absolutely. I mean,
it's
like
our constituency.
I don't know. I have a hard time motivating myself to be terrified about the anti-hunting movement. I'm sure I know there's threats there. You know, they
Yeah,
have. If I would lived in Washington, I'd be bummed that I couldn't hunt bears in the spring. And there's other
yeah,
examples as well. But this one is terrifying to me.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
It's
it
real.
would, if we didn't have federal public lands, that would destroy my way of life.
Yeah, right. Right, exactly. And the arguments that'll be made about that. This is a tangent, but I think it's important. Like it's like, well, we're only going to sell off the things that are we're not going to sell off the things that you're thinking about. We're not going to sell off these big things that have, the big tracks that have names on them and stuff. We're just going to sell off these little pieces that nobody's thinking about. It's
Like the
how
scrubby little chunk where you shot your antelope.
exactly both my antelope. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Like those that's where people who want to scrap it out and want to be able to have freedom to move around and hunt for themselves. That's where we hunt. Like not everybody's going to go to the big chunk that's a designated named national forest.
National monument or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's how you hunt. And so when they're talking about that, that's what they're talking about getting rid of. When you're driving around and you're looking on your map and you're finding the little places and you see, when you're antelope hunting, you see some antelope, but are they in public or not? That's what they're talking about getting rid of. All of that, right? And
Yeah.
we need all the allies we can get to stop that. And I think that there are a significant amount of agriculture producers who could be on our side for that.
Yeah. If that gets serious, then we just need to stop working on cultural issues in hunting and just totally full-throatedly get on board with fighting that bullshit until it goes away.
100%.
Because that's the most important thing that you could that's the worst thing that could happen to hunters like us.
I agree. Let's hold if that gets to that point, we need to be holding hands with Cam Hanes. Stop.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
It's a bigger issue,
Yeah.
And I think that's I don't know. I think we need to think outside of the box and gain more allies on that. And if there are, and that the Farm Bill is a predictable legislative vehicle or lever that could affect some of this in some ways. So it plays into that way. But yeah, that's really gotta. Yeah, that'd be a travesty.
I'm not gonna let it affect my hunting one way or another. I have a 2024, whatever was federal land in 2024 is federal land for me going forward, no matter what,
Yep.
Like 100%. At some point you just have to I don't know. It's I view it as my civic responsibility to continue to hunt what have traditionally been public lands.
Agreed.
Because it's like we're born on this little speck in the cosmos, and there's all these rules and regulations about where we can and cannot go. And now there is a push to make it so that there's fewer places we can go.
Yeah.
And what pisses me off is it's the right. I thought the Republicans were the freedom, they're the ones that want more freedom.
Right. And that's the thing is I don't get what they're thinking there, right? Like they're going to piss off a lot of their constituents. And it's this idea of public property being an anathema to the free market. But if you're that far into some sort of ideological purity scale that you're going to hurt everyone that votes for you that goes hunting, and not every hunter is a Republican. I don't mean to say that, but
no,
that's that's really like, if you're just doing it based on some sort of ideological feeling, and you have no um, conception of what that means for reality and public people, that's just un-American, man. That's not right. And if you're limiting people's access to go out and hunt on, you know, publicly accessible land, to stretch your legs, to go out and find things on your own, and you're kettling people in. I mean, that's what America, for better or for worse, that's what America is built on, right? Is to be
I
able
don't,
to go
yeah,
out.
yeah, yeah. I think it'd be terrible for human health, mental health, and physical health.
Totally, totally. Yeah, no, it's abhorrent. It needs to be defeated. It needs, and I don't know. I can't gauge the degree. I know that this is a more serious push than has been made in a long time, and I can't gauge the degree to which I can. I don't know where it's at exactly, but
Yeah,
it
it's focused on Utah, but 13 other states signed something in support of their efforts.
that's right. Amicus briefs were, so they drafted arguments in favor of it, and yeah, and they're not telling the truth. Like, that's the other thing, is that, like, you'll hear a lot of things about, oh well, we just want it to be state land instead of federal so that the state can benefit, but the states don't have the resources to manage those lands. Like, unless those same states who are, conservative, are going to be raising taxes significantly, really significantly, to pay for the maintenance of those lands, they're not going to be able to do it. So it's just blatantly a smash and grab to sell off, like, publicly held valuable assets to people who already have enough. And that, I don't know, man. I understand I understand the ideological perspective, but again, ideology doesn't exist in a vacuum. And if you're just advancing ideological goals for ideology's sake, and it's going to harm so many people that way, that is not okay. It's not right.
Yeah,
Politics outside of that, that's not good.
yeah, yeah. I don't understand where that comes from. Like, there was a time when, not that long ago, when there were huge swaths of this country that weren't owned by anybody,
Right.
you know? And then, you know who Henry George was?
No.
Oh, he ran for president. He was an economist. He wrote a really influential book in the early 1800s about his economic theories, and one of them is named after him. It's called Georgism.
I've
And
heard of that.
yeah, so he thought that the in the same way that air is our natural birthright, he thought land was our natural birthright, and that there shouldn't be land ownership in the US. You could control land. Like, you, Evan, could start a ranch, and
Mm-hmm.
you would pay a tax to use that land for your ranching enterprise.
Yeah,
But
right.
so, like, the idea there is that we all share communally property rights.
Right, right,
And if you want to exert extra property rights, uh, then you have to pay for them. And that he thought that the whole taxation system should be based on land.
right.
You shouldn't be
Yes,
taxed. You shouldn't be taxed on what you produce and sell, because that's the benefit. That's like the product of your own labor.
right,
Um,
right,
but you should be taxed when you preempt natural resources.
right, right.
And this guy was, like, not considered a Fruit Loop. He had a pretty successful he didn't win, but he ran for president. He did quite well. When he died, 100,000 people went to his funeral in New
That's
York
crazy.
City. Yeah.
That's crazy. And that's the thing is like, so I think it's a nihilistic perspective to just say that like all land totally should just be in private hands and creating, wealth for private individuals, right? Like I don't like that. That is really, I think, an extreme position. I think, and
I'd
I'm
say it
not
should be at least the balance should at least be the way it is right now.
right. Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't think it's hurting anybody to have what public land we have left, and I think that it there's something we there's something about America and about American values that are not entirely in a like laissez-faire free market system. And I'm not saying that as like a I'm just saying that like you can't define American values with just one thing. If you're defining, or I'm trying to say, I guess, is if you're trying to define American values solely as a laissez-faire free market system, you're missing a lot, right? You're missing a lot of things that people value, and a lot of things that, in my opinion, are part of American values. And the public land thing is a big thing for that. It's not a left-wing perspective to say that we should have public land. I think that's just an American perspective. That's one of the things that's one of the great ideas that America had, And so this idea that it is a left wing sort of like
Socialist thing to have public land. Yeah,
right.
I don't think that's the right way to couch it at all.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah. Anyway,
Uh,
that was a big
there was
tangent, but I
a
think
there
it's important.
there was a success. It was yeah. We're getting off top, but and I would almost. But now this is the best stuff we talked about. It's the most interesting part. It's the way these
Agreed.
podcasts go. You don't know where the conversation's going to go, but and maybe you and I should consider. I'd love to look at this initiative in detail and podcast about sometime if you'd be into it
Yeah, that sounds good.
sometime this winter. It wouldn't take us long. It's not like the farm bill.
Right.
It wouldn't take us long to research it. I mean,
Right. Right. Yeah. I'm sure there's people who'll be interested in talking about it too. But the yeah,
but there
I
was a
don't know that.
success today. You sent me a text. There was a
Yeah.
yeah, in terms
So
of public
there
access.
in Minnesota, there was a transfer, not a huge one, but a pretty good sized one for Minnesota. 6,200 acres of land in northern Minnesota was transferred to the federal government, and specifically for to expand sort of an area near the Boundary Waters Canoe Area, BWCA.
Who owned the
And
land previously?
so it this was something that was it was a potlatch land company, a paper, or no, they weren't a paper timber company. Or eventually they were, but they were a big timber company, and they ended up selling off their land in Minnesota. And then there were a few different uh, uh, like conservation organizations that purchased it, and they've been preparing those lands and holding those lands for a time when they could transfer to public use. And so that has been this has been a success. It's been transferred instead of state, it's federal, whatever. That's fine. That means public use, public access. That's where it's going to be. And this is the same. It's really it's where my near where my cabin is. It's like very uh, what you picture in the Boundary Waters kind of a thing, like big forests, rocky outcroppings, really worth preserving. And so 6,200 acres in that area is a gem, and that's just it's great. And it's going to expand the Superior National Forest, and then they're going to do some wildlife habitat management that they already have funding for to increase its value to conservation. So, yeah, that's a great thing to go out on. I forgot all about
Yeah,
that, man. I sent
yeah.
you that this morning, but yeah,
Go,
it's great,
go federal government in Minnesota,
right?
bucking the trend.
Yeah, not selling anything, buying
Yeah,
more.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. Thanks for all the hard work you put into researching this, and I hope people get something out of it. There's some facts and figures for them to consider.
Yeah, thanks. It's good to see you, Matt. I
All right,
appreciate it.
back
See you
at you.
again soon.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
All right, bye, Matt.